Welcome back to Sledgehammer Horror, guys. I am Ken Sledge, and let's talk horror. Now, today I am joined by the beautiful Molly Henery. Molly, how you doing today?
Hello, I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
It's an honor to have you and your amazing pets with you as well. This is so amazing.
This-
Um, Now, before we talk about why you're here, Molly, I want the people that don't know you to get to know you here for a second. You are a film critic and a published author of both fiction and nonfiction. You've been writing about horror films for over 8 years and are probably most well known for your Uterus horror column on Certified Forgotten. Now, for the people that don't know about the Uterus horror column, what can you tell people a little bit about what you do and what you're writing about with that?
Yeah, so it's a column that started, God, at the beginning of the pandemic, which seems like a very long time ago. Um, and basically, it's a subgenre that has existed for a long time, but I kind of made up the name and defined it. And it's a subgenre of films where the focus is on the journeys of young women or non-binary individuals or people who are femme presenting and their coming of age stories, whether that be related to just growing up and becoming an adult or coming into their sexuality.
Mhm.
It's essentially coming of age stories, but we typically get that male point of view when it comes to those stories. So these are the ones that are uniquely about women, like Jennifer's Body and Ginger Snaps, The Craft, things like that. And I
And it's
write
funny.
almost about every month for that one. Usually every
Well,
month I try.
what's amazing is the first two movies that you just said, with Jennifer's Body and Ginger Snaps, two of the worst marketed movies of all time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I'm glad that movies like that are finally getting their comeuppance. People are finally realizing how great these movies were because the marketing was all about the sexualization of the young ladies in the film.
Mhm.
And that's not the farthest thing from what these movies are really about. Like you said, the coming of age. And for me, as a 37-year-old man, that's something that's hard for me to understand, the coming of age of a young lady, because I don't know about it, but I'm living it right now with two young
Mhm.
daughters. So to watch stories like this and to have my young daughters watch stories like this and see their peers on TV, even if you go back to, like the Exorcist, Poltergeist, especially Poltergeist, young Carol Ann, you get to see the development of her character throughout that trilogy of the first three films. And to watch these young ladies come into their own, and I can see that with my daughters. You don't have to be, and I'm so sorry, I hate the term, you don't have to be woke to understand
Mhm.
that type of thing, and I said this on a podcast I just did, but people that talk about woke horror don't realize that horror has been woke since Phantom of
Yeah.
the Opera 1938. So horror has always had a deeper message to it. It's not always been surface level, and that's what I love about horror. And you're talking about, with your column, you're bringing this stuff to the forefront, and we're lucky enough to be supportive of a genre where, since the 60s, 70s, 80s, we've had women coming out and kicking the shit out of these men.
Yeah.
Women have had their spotlight in horror, and I think it's so special that horror has always been ahead of the curve when it comes to these social issues. And what made you want to start writing about horror movies, and especially young women, coming of age type stuff? What made you get the drive and the push to start writing about something so personal?
Yeah, I mean, with specifically with the Uterus horror column, I what's funny is it's actually a meme that that made me kind of make the connection. It's, I don't
Yes.
know, you might remember it was really popular like early 2000s, where it was a meme that was like a cartoon school lunchroom, and it would have different groupings of things at each
Of the
table, and it'd be
table.
like, which table would you sit at?
Yes.
And there was one that had, it was Ginger Snaps, Carrie, and Jennifer's Body. And that was kind of the moment that it clicked for me, where I was like, holy shit, these are the types of films that I love. These are the ones that I'm always drawn to. And obviously you see people talking about them on an individual level, like people love Carrie, people love Ginger Snaps, but
Mhm.
and obviously there, especially between Jennifer's Body and Ginger Snaps, there are a lot of similarities in there. Even some of the shots are the same. But you don't really see people talking about those types of films as a whole. And it's something that I, as a woman and as a queer woman, I think it's important to talk about these types of films and really highlight them and bring them into focus, just because even though women have been at the front of horror films, like they're the focus of most horror films, especially with the whole final girl trope. But it's still a lot of times is considered a guy genre.
Yeah.
And I hate that. It drives me nuts every time. Like, I cannot tell you how many times when I tell people, even when I was younger, when I was just a horror fan, or even now saying that I write about horror, people either look at me like I'm a serial killer, or they're like, wait, but you're a girl. Why do you like that stuff?
And I think it's hilarious because I am like horror dad in the community. You know, like I said, Ashley and I, she does a lot of Sledgehammer horror with me. And I have a lot of friends that are female in the community. And what you guys go through as being a part of the community and being a woman, it's always like, let's comment about their looks. Or the minute someone finds out that you're a horror fan, okay, well, I'm going to put your knowledge to the test with trivia. Like, what the hell, man? No one does that shit to me. You know, my wife says she's a horror fan, and people are like, well, what's your favorite horror movie from 1942? Only from September to November. Like, what? Why don't you say that shit to me? You know?
I even had that exact same scenario happen to me. It was many years ago when I lived in Arizona, and I was co-hosting a screening of Pet Sematary, the original Pet Sematary, for Women in Horror Month. And after the screening, it was me, my husband, and one of my guy friends were like sitting around talking, and these two guys come up and just immediately start quizzing me and asking me questions and like, well, what's your favorite this kind of horror movie? And it's just like totally ignoring the two men that I'm with and not asking them the same questions. And I know like part of it is they might have been asking me because I was the person there co-hosting the event, but it felt very much like you're coming at me just because I'm a woman and you want like to see if I actually know what I'm talking about. And if I didn't, I didn't plan the event. I didn't do any of that. I was invited to come co-host the event. So
and there's a reason that you were invited.
I think I'm not an expert at everything, but I definitely I know my shit.
Right. Well, I think the reason why is I think it's just like the shallow, I need validation of myself. Well, if you don't know this answer and I do, I'm better than you. And it's just like, we're not supposed to be like that, especially in the horror community. We're supposed to lift each other up and celebrate each other. Like, that's why we get the divide of like the diehard Scream fans and the diehard Halloween fans. And it's like, did you notice that Billy and Stu were wearing the same shoes in Scream? If you didn't, you're not a real fan. Like, what? I don't give a shit about their shoes. I want to see them kill the fawns. That's all I care about. But, and it's just like, it really is. It's something I laugh about, but it is something that really bothers me because we should be at a point now to where we understand that horror is not a male genre. Horror is not a straight genre. Horror is not a white genre. Everybody of every sexual orientation, color, race, creed can love horror. And the minute I find out someone likes horror, I'm like, welcome to primetime, bitch. Let's drop some Kruger in here. Like, that's how it should be. We should celebrate our love of horror, not question our love of horror. So in order for you to write about horror, Molly, and to be as important as you are, you not only do you write your column, but you are also a reviewer, you are also a critic. In order to be that important in the horror world, at least in my opinion, horror had to start for you somewhere. So I want to go back to the past here for a second, Molly, and talk about what got you started in the genre, your first horror movie. And Molly, the first horror movie you watched was
A Nightmare on Elm Street. This is honestly one of my favorite stories to tell. Especially because it makes my sister look bad. But I was only 4 years old when I watched that movie.
Oh.
And like, it's my first actual film memory too, is watching that movie. Like, I remember I had like Cinderella on VHS and stuff like that, but the first actual memory I have of watching a film is A Nightmare on Elm Street. And my sister is 9 years older than me, so she would have been about 13 at the time. And her and a friend were babysitting me, and my sister wasn't even supposed to be watching it. So I always assumed, I've never even thought to ask her, but I always just assumed that her friend brought the movie. And we were in the basement watching it. And for some reason, they thought it'd be a great idea to have me watch it with them. And the best part is when my parents came home early, and instead of stopping the VHS, they decided it would be a really great idea to run upstairs to keep my parents from coming down to see what they were watching and leaving me in the basement with Freddy Krueger.
Well, I do got to say real quick to your sister, I love you. You're amazing. Thank you for starting something that I think is so special. Me as a parent, I have a 14-year-old son, I have a 10-year-old daughter, and I have a 3-year-old daughter. And I've introduced all my kids to horror at a very young age. But I feel just like with anything else in life, it comes with education. And as long as you
Mhm.
have the education to go along with it of this is fake, this is not real, this is a fantasy, this is something we watch for entertainment. If you really hurt somebody, you got to have the education to go along with it. You don't run upstairs when your parents are home and leave your little sister downstairs to be terrified. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, total side note. Thank you for starting horror for her, Molly's sister. Now, I've always said that I think this is the closest between this and Psycho, in my opinion, are the closest thing to a perfect horror movie that you can get. I do find little qualms with both that really, really irritate me. But obviously, Nightmare on Elm Street has stood the test of time, and we're still
Mhm.
talking about it today. Hopefully, getting a reboot here soon. What would you say the scene was that affected you the most from Nightmare on Elm Street?
Funnily enough, I think that it was Glenn's kill scene. And I think even though when you think about it, it's even though there's the whole like buckets of blood shooting out of the bed and stuff, it's realistically the least violent kill
I
in
know.
the entire film. And I think for me, why it was so terrifying is because when you're a little kid, you always think that hiding under the covers in your bed is going to protect you from the boogeyman. It's going to protect you from the monster in the closet kind of thing. And so to see a kid in his bed get absolutely eviscerated, that at such a young age to have it break all my notions of of what safety was to me. I
Yeah.
think that it was that was a very pivotal moment, and it's always the one I think of. And even now as an adult, like technically speaking, the way that they did that is
With the
so
rotating room.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yes, and it's just there's so much technicality in that film that is beautifully done. But with her death with the rotating room, and then like flipping
Yeah.
everything upside down for Glenn's so it can like
Oh,
pour out.
Tina. You're talking about Tina at the
Tina,
beginning, the
yes,
blonde. Okay.
God. I knew it ended with an A, but I couldn't think.
Well, I mean, and we forget how small budget this movie is.
Yeah.
Like
And it's like
Freddy
that's
Krueger.
something that they would do now, but to think of it done back then too with that budget is amazing, really.
Yeah, yeah, it's literally a small budget film. I mean, Robert Englund's Freddy Krueger, I think, has between 5 to 7 minutes of screen time in the movie,
Mhm.
just because the makeup they wanted to make it look, and they didn't have the budget to keep doing the makeup over and over again. So that's why you get, the hanging death with Rod in the jail cell. You never see Freddy Krueger. You get Tina's death of her being drugged up the wall, and you never see Freddy Krueger. And I think it's Johnny Depp's waterbed kill. You
Yeah.
don't see Freddy Krueger, and I think that is just such a genius move, because what's scarier than our imagination? What's
Mhm.
scarier than we can't see the boogeyman, but we know that he is there? Like that to me. And you were talking about the waterbed scene. That was actually the second worst thing to ever happen to Johnny Depp in a bed. Just throwing that out there. Sorry, that was bad. But anyway, with this movie, it's something that we did get a reboot of this. We did get a remake of it. Were you a fan of the Nightmare on Elm Street remake?
I mean, I wouldn't call myself a fan, but I don't hate it as much as a lot of people do. I honestly think it feels very of the time,
Yeah.
which a lot of films from that time feel very of that time period, even more so than a lot of 80s films, I feel like. um, but I also think that the biggest issue was just that they went CGI rather than practical
Yes.
for the makeup effects. Because, uh, again, I can't remember his name. I think his last name is Haley, or he has
Jackie
Haley in
Earle
his
Haley.
title. Yes. I thought he was a great Freddy Krueger. Like his performance was fantastic. I just think that I think if they had done practical, because practical always stands the test of time better. Sorry, cat butt. It always stands the test of time better. And again, it already feels so dated, even though it's like what 15 years old now.
Right.
But
Well, we know
I
what your
still
cat thinks
watch
about the
it.
movie.
Yeah.
The
What
minute you
did you
started
do?
talking about it, we got cat butt. But what you're saying and what you guys are watching right now over top, you're seeing the scene from the original Nightmare on Elm Street. where they put their face against the wall and pushed it out. And now, unfortunately, I'm going to show you the remake version where you have all the CGI happening on the wall. See what you guys are seeing right now. And something that I do want to say to your credit, what you just said, I 100% agree with everything you just said. The fact that if you're going to do a remake, don't just take everything they did in the original and put CGI over top of it and call it your own. Doesn't work that way. And again, I get a lot of shit for saying this, and I'm going to stand by this. When it comes to Freddy Krueger, Jackie Earle Haley did the job better than Robert Englund did. Hear me out for a second before the torches and pitchforks come out. I love Freddy, Robert Englund. I love him. I think he's amazing. I'm not supposed to. The guy's a child killer. I'm supposed to hate him. And Jackie Earle Haley made me hate that character every time he was on screen. And, ooh, sounds fun. You know, like I hated the guy. I despised him. When it was Freddy, Robert Englund's Freddy in the Dream Warriors, the Dream Master, he has so much charisma. They had the child killer, Freddy Krueger, on Nickelodeon getting slimed. I mean, like, that's how much charisma the guy had. So when it comes to playing the character of Freddy Krueger, obviously Robert Englund's my guy, but Jackie Earle Haley knew the assignment. He made you hate him. You know, every time he was on screen, you were like, man, this guy can burn again. I don't care. So that's my TED talk for today. And I'm with you.
And
I
I definitely agree that to an extent. I mean, I am a sucker for a sassy villain. So I think when you're in the context of just the first film, when he's supposed to be scary, that's the first one where he is like actually genuinely scary. He doesn't have that kind of like sassy one-liner thing that he always does. I think if you think in that context, then yes, when you compare the two, the remake, obviously a way scarier Freddy. But I'm always like even like with Disney villains, my favorite Disney villain is Ursula, because I love a sassy villain. That's why I've always preferred Freddy Krueger over like Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees, because they don't talk.
Right.
But I do think if you actually want a Freddy that's scary, if they had done practical, he would have been a scarier Freddy for sure.
100%. And don't get me wrong, like Freddy Krueger is my second favorite horror villain of all time, beaten only by the young doll there behind you on the wall. I will always be a Chucky. Child's Play is my favorite horror franchise of all time, hands down. It does something special for me, and it's so amazing. We're not here to talk about you, Charles. Let's go back to Freddy for a little bit. In the OG Nightmare on Elm Street, we talked a little bit about all the deaths. Essentially, there's not very many deaths in it, but the ones that are excruciatingly memorable. They are so memorable. Every single one. So I know that the Johnny Depp death is one that that's the scene that affected you the most. But which kill stuck with you the most? Would it still be Depp's or?
That's tough, because like my knee-jerk reaction is probably still watching Glenn die, but Rod. There's something about his death, and I think it's because with that one, there's something more menacing about it, because it wasn't like as gory, and he was trying to make it look like he didn't do it.
Right.
He made it look like a suicide, which I think makes it like definitely more menacing, but also it makes you think about in real life, if that was to happen, that would be such a smart way for this villain to go about killing people, because there would be no way to know that this guy didn't just kill himself because he got arrested after he allegedly killed his girlfriend.
And yeah, like I said, who's going to even investigate into that?
Yeah. They would just assume like, oh, we got the guy, we're done.
Yeah.
We know in real life and horror movies, cops aren't always so good at their job, especially in horror movies.
Right. Well, it's funny you bring that up, because, and this is not me telling a story, this is not haha funny. I grew up with a guy that scene, like, I love horror. Freddy Krueger, A Nightmare on Elm Street ruined horror for a friend that I grew up with, to the point he would not, absolutely refuse to sleep with sheets on his bed because of that scene in Nightmare on Elm Street. After that scene, I mean, I haven't seen the kid in probably 15 years, but growing up would never sleep with sheets on his bed. Freddy Krueger like terrified him. Like that was just something that's and it wasn't even like Freddy. It was that scene, like you said, just seeing
Hmm.
the sheet come out and wrap around his neck, and the practical of the makeup and the doll that they ended up using when he was hung, and just how white he looked. He just said that really scared him so bad. Um, so yeah, obviously Nightmare on Elm Street, very, very important in the grand scope of horror. A lot of people put it right on their Mount Rushmore. But A Nightmare on Elm Street is part of a much bigger franchise now. So is the OG your favorite in the franchise, or which movie in the franchise would you say is your favorite?
Oh, that's a tough one because I love all of them for very different reasons. Um, oh wow. Because my gut reaction is to say either the first one or Dream Warriors,
Hmm.
but I I also love the second one. It's I know that the second one is one that's like getting more love now, especially now that it's kind of being reclaimed as a queer horror film.
Yeah,
Um, Man, that's tough. And but I will say I like Freddy's Dead. A lot of people don't like Freddy's Dead. I still think it's a fun one. That's a tough question. I don't know if I'm going to be able to answer that because I am already a very indecisive person to begin with, and there's so many options to choose from.
yeah,
I'm just going to say the first one just because I have that emotional connection to it as it being my first horror film. And kind of like I don't know if I would be a horror fan if I hadn't seen that film at such a
yeah.
young age. So I'm probably just gonna have to go with the first one, even though I love them all. I like
Right.
anytime they're on TV, no matter which one it is, even the remake, I'm gonna watch it. So
Well, and my thing is like my argument for the first four, honestly, the OG is as close as you can get to perfect. If you take out that stupid fucking blow up doll at the end and that dumb Freddy car, I hate that stupid Freddy
oh
car so
yeah.
much. If you take that last 5 minutes off, this is the perfect horror movie to me. Absolutely the perfect horror movie. The second one is so dark and so scary. And I think it's the darkest one in the whole franchise. So I can, run with that. The third one has the best kids.
Yeah.
That's the one where I very much root for the kids as much as I'm rooting for Freddy. I want to see Freddy. I want to see his charisma, but I love all the kids that are the Dream Warriors. I think they're great. I think the practical effects in that movie are awesome. And the one I watched the most as a kid that will always be my favorite, no matter what, is the Dream Master. And I know a lot of people don't like the Dream Master. And yes, as an adult watching it, it has its flaws. I get it. But this is the one that just it was this, Friday the 13th Part 3 and Halloween 5 are the main ones I watched the most as a kid, so they're always going to be special to me. So that's my segue now, Molly. We talk about a special movie and what these movies mean to me, but now my little buddy Ghostface is here, and he has a question for you. What's your favorite scary movie, Molly? What is your favorite horror movie of all time?
Um, I For anyone that follows me, this is gonna be a really obvious answer. That is going to be Ginger Snaps. There's you can see I have one poster for it right there. I have like commissioned art pieces that I have done. I even have like a werewolf Build-A-Bear that I have in an outfit to look like Ginger. I actually
Yes.
even have a tattoo inspired by
Oh,
Ginger Snaps.
so
Like
awesome.
I absolutely love it. Actually, you can see a VHS right in there too for Ginger Snaps.
And see, it's funny because like that is a movie that is off the beaten path when you talk about,
Mhm.
and what I mean by that, when a horror fan hears me say that, they're like, really? We got to remember, in the grand scheme of things, horror fans are a very, very, very minority part of society, and a lot of people don't understand because, like I said, the same with Jennifer's Body. A lot of people, when they saw the initial advertising for that, it probably went in one ear and out the other because it was just so cut and dry with the advertising. But Ginger Snaps is in my top five favorite werewolf movies of all time.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
it's that good to me. And outside of Lon Chaney's Wolfman and my obvious favorite, American Werewolf in London, Ginger Snaps has the best werewolf transformation scenes in it.
Yes.
Um,
Oh my God. I so many people hate the werewolf in Ginger Snaps, but I actually think it's brilliant because
Mhm.
when we're seeing it, when we see her like big final transformation at the end of the film, everyone's like, "Oh, why is she hairless and slimy? It's gross." She just transformed. Do you think she's gonna sprout hair all of a sudden?
Right.
It takes time to grow hair, which is why in like the sequel and the prequel we see them hairy, but it doesn't it doesn't make any sense for for her to automatically be covered in fur, especially since they take a much more biological approach to lycanthropy in that film compared to things like Wolfman, where it's like curses and stuff. But I think it's actually brilliant, and I love one of my favorite things about that film, aside from just everything about it, the plot, the acting, but I just thinking about that final moment, I love that it perfectly mirrors the first time we see the sisters, because it's that same framing with their beds and stuff and them in between. Whereas like the first scene, they're like doing their pact, holding hands to, out by 16 or out by 16 or dead on the scene, but together forever. And then the last moment we see Bridget holding her dead werewolf sister. Like just seeing that, oh, it's so good. I
Katie tried to lock pause with you just now to make that promise. She was trying. She was like, I got it. Out by 16. Come on. Take my hand, Mom. No, and you're right. Like, and I love the fact that we got a movie that was so influential now. Because like I said, when it came out, it went right under the radar. But now I've talked more about ginger snaps in the last 2 years than I had in the previous whatever combined. And that's not a bad thing. You know, like you were talking about earlier. Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Halloween 3, Jason, Friday the 13th Part 5, Ginger Snaps, Jennifer's Body. These were movies that when they came out were looked at as the oddities, you know, the movies that didn't belong, and for different reasons. You know, Nightmare 2 because it was the gay one. Like, okay, we see boobs in every movie. You got one guy's ass, you walk out of the theater. Fuck off with that. You know, Friday 5 because it wasn't Jason. Guys, that's a Jason movie. That's Jason up until the end. Okay, give me your Roy Burns, whatever you want. It's Jason. And then Halloween 3 for obvious reasons, you know, and we come to realize that advertising can kill a movie as much as it can. When you get movies like the Blair Witch Project, Paranormal Activity, and even more recently, Barbarian, which had the perfect advertising.
Yes.
Those can make a movie. But then you get movies like these and they completely destroy a movie. And then luckily they don't just go away. We can still watch them again. But I'm glad that we have people like you that are writing about these movies to keep bringing them to the forefront and keep reminding people that these movies are great. Just go back and revisit them with an open mind now that the advertising isn't fresh on your mind. So I've had an amazing time with you, Molly. But before I let you go, I have one last question for you. We're going to bounce back to the OG Nightmare on Elm Street. And what we're going to do is we're going to rank this movie on a skull count. Now, we're not judging it on acting, production, score, direction, nothing like that. We're not being critics. What we are doing is judging this movie on how much it affected you on your first viewing. So 0 skulls being not effective, 5 being extremely effective. You can use half and quarter skulls anywhere in the middle. Molly, what would your ranking of Nightmare on Elm Street be?
I mean, honestly, it has to have all the skulls, every skull. You can give it even some extra skulls.
Right.
I mean, not only because, like I said, who knows if I would even be a horror fan now if I hadn't been introduced to that film so young. But I don't know if this is where this came from, but I like my entire childhood had issues with nightmares, so I am assuming that it is partly because of that movie also.
Right.
So it affected my childhood to the point where I like had to go to therapy because of my nightmares. So it's very influential for me. Maybe not necessarily in all good ways, but still very influential.
And something you said at the beginning, like you knew you had Snow White VHSs and things like that, but you remember your first horror movie. You know, I don't remember my first rom-com. I don't remember my first action movie, but I remember my first horror movie. That was House from 1986. My boy
that was
William
my second horror film.
Yes, my boy William Catt was holding it down as Roger Cobb in that movie, and that's my favorite horror movie to this day. I've got the poster in my background. I've got 10 shirts. I'm obsessed with House. It's my favorite ever. And I knew the answer to that, but my script told me I still had to ask. And one thing I should have said earlier, guys, that I didn't, but you knew it was coming because you've watched this podcast before. All of Molly's social media links and every way to read her articles are all available down in the description. So make sure you're following her on social media. Make sure you're staying up to date on everything that she's doing because it's very important. And she's a voice out there for all horror fans. And especially if you're into female led, coming of age, queer horror movies, she is the person you're going to want to talk to because guess what? She knows her shit. You don't even got to quiz her on it. So, Molly, please don't go anywhere. I got a couple more questions for you. Everybody else, as always, keep talking horror, stay what you are, and we'll see you guys soon.